Hey guys, how's it going? This is IronSkillz. I'm Skillzman.
And I am Ironmonger.
And this is an IronSkillz podcast. I've been trying to convince Iron to do more of these podcasts, but coming up with good topics has been a challenge. However, I've come up with a topic that Iron finally agreed to.
If agreed to is synonymous with whittling someone down until they give in, then yes.
Anyways, today I'll actually be interviewing Iron. Here's how it's gonna go. I'm gonna try and ask Iron a few questions about his opinions on Smite and what he likes about being a support main. Let's start right now so that you can have all the time you need to give the answers. Question 1. Why do you like Smite?
When you gave me these questions to prepare, it actually made me think, why do I like Smite? I think it has something to do with the fact that the MOBA genre in general is both competitive and it's cooperative. You know, I've tried a few shooters, but the fact that it's really hard to play a game where it feels like you're really part of a team and not someone out there trying to do your own thing and hope it helps your team. MOBAs make it very clear what it is you're supposed to be doing together, and it really forces you to think about balance. So I really like MOBAs for that reason. I think the reason I like Smite is because of the third-person controls. I've actually tried Paragon recently, but for some reason there's just something about the way that Smite does it that just feels more natural to me. It's not to say one's better than the other, it's just this feels more natural. But it might have to do with the fact that this is my first MOBA, which means I've had the most experience here, and thus I have the most muscle memory for this game. So it's probably something to do with me being biased about this being a very good MOBA with good controls, but it was also the very first one I ever played.
Yeah, I can understand that. Okay, so question 2. What are your 2 favorite gods from each class?
Okay, you gave me these questions earlier, so I have my list right here in front of me. Assassins, I like Thor because he's got a stun and a wall, which makes me feel a bit more Guardian-like. And he does feel a lot like a warrior because he used to be one. And he still feels like one even though they put him in the assassin class. I like Fenrir because very mobile. And since I'm not very tanky when I play Fenrir, it's nice to have that ability to just get out of there, because I get kind of nervous when I get low health, especially when I don't have defense. And I love his ultimate because it's very hard crowd control, and it makes me feel like a guardian again when I'm using it, especially when my allies take advantage of me standing still. For warriors, I like Wan Yu because I love that heal. It's not very powerful, but you can use it very frequently, especially in the late game team fights. And I love his ultimate because the damage is really high potential, but then there's also that possibility that you could just decide to dismount early, or just the ultimate ends and you stun 1 or 2 people, and that leads to an ally hitting a hard to hit ultimate. The second warrior is Amaterasu. Her heal is only for herself, but I love that it's stronger because it allows me to feel more confident, at least being able to protect the solo lane. Even if I don't end up winning that lane, I can guarantee that nothing bad will happen to it until the late game. I love her ultimate, partially because it used to be Guan Yu's ultimate, but her kit really comes together to make that ultimate shine more than it used to, and it's kind of nice to see the ultimate be given to someone who kind of centers more around it, just kind of combos with it more. For Guardians, this was tough because as a support main, I play so many Guardians, but probably number 1 is Athena, because even though she only has 1 hard crowd control, that crowd control is not her ultimate, so she can use it very frequently, and it's very strong. So if her allies are capable of taking advantage of it, it just does so much, and she can use it very frequently. And she's very mobile, which means I can get into the fight faster. A support that is not in a team fight is a support not really doing their job. So it's nice to be able to dash into the team fights and make sure I'm always where I need to be. Sylvanas is probably the second Guardian I like the most, just barely above. I love his pull. It's hard to hit, but when you do hit it, it feels so satisfying. And I love the dynamics that come with his kit, because you can root someone to make the pull a lot easier, or you can take the risk of trying to pull them without the root, and then if that hits, you can root them in front of you, and that pulls them out of position even longer. So there's kind of a reward for taking the more difficult path, and I love when kits do that. And also his heal is really strong early game. Also, a little shout out to Geb. I know you said only 2, but he's just really good at defending people and saving lives. So mages, Raijin, because he's a very crowd control oriented mage, surprisingly. He doesn't have as much crowd control as a Guardian, but his ultimate has a really good crowd control. And I love that he has that same dynamic ultimate that Sylvanas has with his pull and root. You can only fire 4 shots, but you have 3 options as to what that shot consists of. You can do half damage and do a taunt, half damage and do a fear, or you can do full damage and it doesn't do any crowd control. And since you can't just spam it until time runs out, you only get 4 shots, you really have to think, do I want to try and do as much damage as possible and ignore all the CC potential? Or do I do a taunt regular to maximize my accuracy? Or do I do a bunch of fears and taunts so that my allies can get the kills? It's really dynamic and I love that. And then there's Isis. I love that she has a stun and her ultimate is so good for objectives. I love that when you do the objective, it has to hurt someone, which means your ultimate's going to charge up. And then when you detonate it, not only do you deal so much damage to the objective, but you heal your team. And that means you're much less vulnerable after doing an objective than most teams are, because typically the enemy team can swoop in and take you while you're weak. But with Isis, you might actually be back in full health, and it's nice. Hunters, I'm still getting better with them, but the ones I've used with moderate success is Hu Yi, because he has a great stun, and his 2 is just really nice. It makes it so that even though when I do hit, it deals a lot more. It makes me feel more satisfied when I do finally land a hit. And his ultimate is great for zoning, and it kind of reminds me of Isis's ultimate. It doesn't do the damage in one huge burst, but it does it immediately, which is good for killing objectives and keeping enemies from attacking because they don't want to get hit. And then there's Neith. I love her root on her first ability because I have practice with line skill shots. Because of that, if I can hit that, I can hit a few basic attacks, and it makes me typically more powerful than when I'm playing one that's really requires you hit all your basic attacks. And I like that she has a heal, so I don't get too nervous when the support leaves and I have to defend the lane by myself.
Next, question 3. What is your favorite mode outside of Conquest?
That would probably be Clash. I like Arena a lot because it goes straight to the team fighting, and I like the coordination, but Clash just feels a little bit more like Conquest. And I feel like now that Clash exists, if I had a friend who had done Arena and then I wanted to bring them to Conquest, normally they'd have to go straight to the more complex mode, but this kind of helps me ease my friends or people I just met into Conquest. And it's also shorter because the team fights happen more frequently and from the start. So it's a really good in-between of Arena and Conquest. And since Arena is really good for learning the mechanics of the game, but Conquest is where all the strategy happens, then it kind of feels like an in-between of those two is really nice for teaching people.
Okay, question 4. Why do you like playing support?
That's kind of hard to answer because liking support is a personality trait. It's not necessarily because support does something really fun. Liking support has to do with you being a certain kind of person. You probably hear all the time that the support has to be selfless, and that's not fully required, but a support needs to be able to enjoy delayed gratification, I think. Now, I'll kind of try to explain that. When you're playing a role that's supposed to kill people, you get this gratification right away. Yes, I got that kill, or whatever you say, and that kind of releases the chemicals in your brain that makes you happy. But with support, the support is a very vital role, and because of how vital the role is, when you win the game and you know deep inside that how important you were, you get a lot more of that gratification at the end than everyone else does. You can argue that people who get like 21 kills by the end of the game and died only like 4 times are really happy, but the support really, if they know how important they were, gets this huge burst of gratification, and I believe that gratification is higher than anyone else experiences all the game. Most people really want that gratification as they get kills, but the support is willing to wait at the very end and get that huge burst of happiness. And if that doesn't really make sense to you, that probably means that you enjoy getting constant bursts of gratification as you get kills, and you don't really understand the self-gratification that you give yourself from knowing, yeah, I was very important in that. I set up so many kills. People may not thank me for it. It's somewhat of a thankless job, but a good support is someone who doesn't need other people to tell them how good of a job they did because they reward themselves. And that's probably another thing, because a lot of people who are good at getting kills, they typically either they want that dominance over someone else, but then they also might want that nice job from someone or you rock, and that makes them even happier. But the support can go a whole game not being thanked for anything and still feel very rewarded because they're rewarding themselves every time they pulled off something really good or they made a great setup, and they don't need to be thanked by anyone. But that doesn't mean you're not supposed to thank them. They really like it when they get thanked for when they save you or something like that.
Alright, question 5. What do you like least about support?
As I think I explained earlier, it's not really the thankless part of the job. And yes, you might argue that it's really easy for people who are doing a bad job to say that the support just wasn't doing their job. But that's not really what I least like about support. What I like least about support has to be the fact that you don't actually have as much control as you think you do. I just said that support is vital, but it actually is possible to win a game with a support who's not really doing much, or that isn't actually part of very many team fights. And that's mainly because an ally could get fed. They get a lot of kills. It's only 10 minutes in and they have 8 kills. They can 1v2 people because they got so much power and they got so much more levels on their abilities than everyone else. And it's possible to win a game like that, but at the same time, the support is really important if the game goes really long. But regardless of what happens, the support can't carry. So carrying, as you know it, I believe, Skillz, is basically the ability to get the most kills on the team in important situations and to take objectives and basically be the person who had the most impact on the game. But that rarely happens because the longer the game goes, the less carrying ability someone has, because eventually everyone will get to level 20, have full build, and now everyone's basically the way they're going to be for the rest of the match. But the support, regardless of how well they do in the early game, can't become a carry because they're building defense. And they're really at the mercy of their allies. If their allies are really good at getting kills, and they're really good at waiting for you to set up those kills, then your job becomes really important. But if your allies retreat a lot, or they just for some reason can't hit their abilities, you have no control over that. You can't say, oh, don't worry, I know you missed, but I'll get it for you. You can't say that because you got too much defense, you don't have any power, you can't really get kills unless you happen to get the last hit by accident, or your Ares and the enemy was already almost dead. The worst part about support is that when you lose a game and you were doing really well, you doing really well doesn't necessarily mean that your team's going to win. So when you lose and you know it's because your allies weren't performing adequately, then it can feel like you lost because of them, not because of you. And a lot of times it can really be easy as the support to blame your team instead of just make do with what you have.
Okay, question 6. What tips can you give people who want to try out support?
Tip number 1. Buy wards every time you recall and make it a habit. Those wards can save lives, and every time you save your ADC's life because you noticed the jungler coming in, that's gold the enemy team didn't receive, and you're not really going to lose that much gold just because you had to go back under tower for a few seconds. Second, think about how you combo with allies. When you're playing as a damage dealer, say Janus, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to try to portal them, and then as soon as they land, I'm going to hit my vortex. But if you're a support, you're thinking, what can I do so that my ally can combo with me? I'm not really thinking about comboing with myself. I'm thinking, if I pull and then root as Sylvanas, what can my ally do immediately after? Or is using my ultimate right now going to give the most impact or set up my ally's ultimate? And that's another thing to keep in mind. You should look at your ally's health and see if they have their ultimate ready. Do not ult unless it's either to save their life or to set up their ultimate or their combo. Next, you need to think about team-based relics. Now, when you're a damage dealer, you might get Sanctuary, because you need to avoid some dangerous ultimate. But you're normally not going to get Sanctuary or Purification as a support unless you're fighting someone who has an ultimate that deals threshold damage, like Thanatos or Ao Kuang, because if they ult you, they just eliminated the tank from the enemy team. And it may sound selfish, but those are pretty much the only times you're going to be getting a relic to save yourself. You'll typically be getting Sprint so that your allies can get away, or they can chase enemies. Curse, because you want the enemy to be slower, or you want their healing to be less effective. Or Shell, because your allies are building all glass tank and you want them to have at least some defense for a few seconds in a team fight. And I think you get the idea there. Think about relics for your allies, not just about saving yourself or making yourself more powerful. Lastly, make sure you communicate your intentions. If the support leaves a team fight because they're too hurt, and their allies think that they're still there and could save them at any time, they may be more aggressive. Or if you want to be aggressive, but your allies are thinking about doing a different objective, you may go in, ult to do something really good, but there's no allies around. Make sure that you are talking to your allies, because above all, it's very important that you know what your team wants to do and that your team knows what you want to do. Because if you're not comboing with your allies, then you're not really doing your job correctly. And if you guys aren't communicating with each other, you may ult when they're not ready, or they may attack when they don't know that you can't. And I've seen a lot of team fights go south because people were doing their own thing and didn't make sure their allies were with them, or they just flat out didn't care. The support needs to be a good communicator.
Alright, question 7. Do you have any advanced tips for support?
First off, if you're playing a support that has very strong AoE ultimate, like Ares or Sylvanas, just to give some examples, I think Blink is a very important relic to get, because it's a very good engage tool and it really throws off the enemy, because you were a few feet away 1 second and now you're in their face trying to ult. And that can really create enough chaos for your allies to land an ultimate or to pick off that really squishy but dangerous target. And a good ult initiation with team backup can typically win a fight in just a few seconds, or at least make the enemy lose their important people and have to retreat. Second, take tower damage for your allies so that they can attack without minions. It really throws off the enemy team when the minion waves are halfway down the lane and then suddenly the enemy team, being you guys, just runs into one of their towers, the tank takes all the damage, the allies kill it in 5 seconds, and they run away. They didn't see it coming because they are using the minions to know how far the enemies had gotten through that lane. But you just skipped all the minions and you just killed that tower in no time flat. It's a really good strategy, especially since Smite is really an objective game. And remember that, Smite is about the objectives. Kills just make it easier. Finally, cooldown reduction is a Guardian's best friend, because your crowd control normally isn't really about the damage, it's about how long the crowd control lasts, what it does, who it affects, all those things. And being stronger doesn't make it more useful, but being able to use it more often makes it much more useful. So always get some amount of crowd control, at least 20%, if not the full 40%.
Okay, question 8. If you could play a role other than support, what would you prefer to play?
I would probably be the solo, simply because being a little bit tanky is normally very welcome and also very effective in the solo lane, especially since one-on-one, if it takes longer to kill someone, it typically means they have more opportunities to fight back. And I really enjoy playing as warriors, and being the solo gives me the opportunity to play as either healing mages or warriors, which are two classes that the support doesn't normally get to play, unless you're Sylvanas.
Alright, finally, question 9. Can you try to explain the relationship between the ADC and the support?
It's a little bit complicated. See, in the early game, the support is trying to protect the ADC, but at the same time, if they can help the ADC get a kill, then that really makes their job a lot easier. But the problem is, the beginning of the game, the minion wave can have a big sway over how the support sees the ADC and how the ADC sees the support. Let me try to explain. It's kind of this upward and a downward spiral. If the support notices that the ADC has very slow wave clear, then the support will do one of two things. They'll either retreat because they can't really be aggressive because they're not that kind of support, or they'll try to assist with wave clear. If the ADC is doing really well with wave clear, then they expect their support to be more aggressive. If they're not doing really well with wave clear, then they're either expecting the support to help with wave clear, or they're actually going to become less aggressive, which makes their wave clear even slower because the support can't really help them. Let me try to illustrate this a bit more. Imagine you're Ares and you're playing with an ADC who doesn't have very fast wave clear. Well, Ares is pretty much all close range or mid range, and he can't really help with wave clear because his flamethrower puts him out in the open to easily be attacked by the enemy. So if he can't help with the wave clear and the ADC's wave clear is still really slow, then suddenly that lane becomes very defensive and they're going to be under their tower a lot more. However, if you have someone like, say, Sylvanas, and then you have an ADC who has as good or better wave clear than the enemy, then Sylvanas will happily use his basic attacks to help make the wave clear much easier to hit and kill, and the ADC will try not to use too many of their abilities so that when Sylvanas goes in and be aggressive, then the ADC is ready to use their most dangerous abilities to combo with Sylvanas. So they kind of play off each other. If the ADC allows the support to be aggressive, then the support will be more aggressive. The whole lane will become kind of this pushing lane. However, if the ADC is kind of slow with the wave clear and the support can't make up for that, the lane will start becoming very defensive. And regardless of which way that goes, it kind of becomes a spiral. If the support becomes more defensive because they can't help with the wave clear, then the ADC becomes more defensive because they don't have the backup of the support, and then the support becomes even more defensive because now they know that the wave's always going to be under tower. In the duo lane, it either becomes a stalemate or you very quickly figure out which team is going to be dominating that lane. Even if they don't get the tower very quickly, you can typically tell which team is going to be winning for the most part.
And that's it for the interview. I don't know about you, but I had fun.
To be honest, when you gave me these questions so I could prepare, I discovered that I had not really put much thought into most of them. Choosing your favorite god from each class is one thing, but asking why I like support kind of made me think.
I'm glad to hear it.
Maybe I should interview you next.
Bring it on. I can take any question.
I think I'll take that as a challenge.
Don't make them insanely hard. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this little interview. IronSkillz out.